but first of all, I'll give you a bit of background to the project. So like many of the other presenters, I started off with a student project, and it was a collaborative project with the students. So they designed the project, we applied for funding for the project together, we carried out the project, and the students wrote the report. And I think it's really important to have students involved at every stage of a collaboration so that it's a co-production rather than me designing a project. I started off with a group of students saying, we're going to think about sustainability, think about the circular economy. And so the students did a lot of the research on this. So some of these images are part of the student research. And so they looked at artists who were making work about fast fashion, and the students are not fashion students, they're fine art students, but they decided that the one thing everybody had in common is that we all wear clothes. And so they, and also that's very important in Leicester because of Leicester's relationship with the fast fashion industry. So they, as I say, they looked at artists that worked with ideas around fast fashion, and then they also looked at the implications of fast fashion on the environment, and particularly on the workers who were producing fast fashion. We also looked at sculpture that was made from waste. And this is an amazing sculpture garden in France. I've put the postcode there if anybody wants to visit it. But it's a park that's that contains, all of these buildings contain sculpture. The buildings are all made from waste. All of the pieces of sculpture are made from waste. And so we looked at various applications of different kind of wastes. So we looked at plastics, and again at artists who were using plastics. We set up, we applied for funding from seed funding from DMU to run a weekend workshop. And we went to the back door of a textiles factory in Leicester, and where people handed us enormous bags of textile waste, and they were very happy to give it to us because it actually costs them to dispose of it. One of the issues with the textile waste is that quite often it's irregular shapes and very small pieces. So we tried both sewing it and weaving, and here you can see some of the students sewing and weaving. And this is the group of students that were involved, and they're actually wearing clothes, hats. We made a sculpture installation with some of the clothes. These came from the clothes that charity shops throw away, so we didn't want to use anything that could actually have a resale value. So charity shops throw away a significant portion of what they're donated because they're torn, or they're dirty, or they're too stained to be saleable. So that was really, so we used the textile waste and the charity shop waste. And on the right, this student is modeling one of the pieces that she made on the day, and really you could only make quite small pieces of clothing, or pieces of clothing that would use these very small irregular shapes. So what we discovered was that sewing these pieces of fabric together was actually very not very difficult, but it wasn't very useful. And so then we started weaving it, and we've left the edges of the weaving raw so that we could see the types of fabric that were used. So on the top left, you can actually see that we've left all the bits of fabric sticking out, so that we could say, well, that's what that piece of fabric looked like looks like when it's woven. We didn't cut any of this fabric down, we just used the irregular shapes, but when they were woven, you couldn't tell that these were very odd shaped pieces of material. So out of this project, a lot of the students who were involved went on in their degree show to actually use waste recycled material from charity shops. So the student on the top left, although you can't see it there because he's very busy waving, made musical instruments out of waste. The student to his right used duvet covers that were being thrown away by charity shops because they were a bit grubby. He used them as canvases, and then also made sculpture from the textile waste. So all of these students, one way or another, used available material rather than using new material to create the work. The student on the bottom left used doors from a skip to paint on, and also a very strange, very Baroque picture frame that he also found in a skip. And on the right, you can see some of the wood that we used as a raw material to build stretchers, to make some of the musical instruments and to make some sculpture from. So out of this project, we presented an event, the Upcycling Station at the British Science Festival, in collaboration with Sung, and Sung showed videos from the Upcycling Network, and at the same time some of the students came along and did weaving and carving and taught members of the public to weave and to carve. And one of the things that we were very interested in experimenting with were waste cable and wire. And there's an enormous amount of waste cables in the world. Anybody who's ever bought a new phone will know that the plug is different and it doesn't fit into your new phone. And so we all have drawers at home of waste cable. And recycling waste cable is very problematic, and quite often when it's upcycled or on a large scale, people burn off the rubber coating to get the valuable metal inside, and this is very dangerous. It's dangerous for their health. It's people can get burned. There's toxic fumes come off some of the burning. So we want to show that the rubber or plastic coating on the wire could also be used and had value, so that to deter people from actually burning it off. So some of this plastic has been stripped off the copper cables, and so then we used both the plastic and the copper. So this is the event at the British Science Festival, and at the right you can see some people carving from that pallet wood in an earlier slide, and also members of the public come along and try weaving. Also, we were showing how people could make musical instruments out of waste wood and metal. Obviously, for this, the student bought some elements to tension the wire on the musical instruments. He had to buy those, but otherwise, he collected all of the coffee cans from restaurants around Leicester. He asked them to save the coffee cans, and he used these to make musical instruments. Just behind the musical instrument is a piece of wood that was again found from a skip, and a bit of it was carved into a spoon, and then the other bit is just a demonstration of how you can carve into any piece of scrap wood. And that piece of carving, again, we used for another project. So these are some of the wire and plastic experiments. So on the image on the left, and again, we left the edges of the weaving sticking out so that people could actually see that it was the wire coating stripped off cables, and on the wire on the right is weaving with the copper wire. Again, and this is a mixture of fabric thread, the copper wire, and the rubber cables. Another project that we're involved in is using waste leather from industry. And so the little bit here on the left is actually a cast from the piece of wood carving that we did at the British Science Festival. And the leather that we're using is all waste from Doc Martens shoe factory, and we also are using leather that's waste from the automotive industry. And in manufacturing, only certain pieces of the leather can be used because they need consistency of thickness and flexibility of the leather. So usually bits of the hide that are around the belly and the shoulders of the animal are not used because they have a different consistency to the back. So the pieces of waste that we were able to get were actually quite large, but they weren't suitable for manufacturing, but they were fine for one-off products. So my colleague Gillian Proctor runs a leather school for the students in the summer. It's a 1-week school, and they use waste leather. And this year you can see the happy student on the top right who's made a laptop bag. So to us that leather looks absolutely beautiful and perfect, but this would be unsuitable for manufacturing. So I've carried out a load of experiments to demonstrate different techniques that can be used for using this waste leather. I wasn't trying to make finished products. I was just simply demonstrating techniques to the students. So the top left is made a mold that's used to cast leather, and there's suede on the inside and leather on the outside. The two images below that would the image on the left is cast from a piece of wood, and the image beside that is a trivet that I got in a charity shop, and I just used that to mold the leather around. And what's very important in this project is that we find low-tech solutions so that these can be applied to situations where people don't have access to equipment or machinery. And then the other image in the middle is a piece of embossed leather, and this can be done again without very sophisticated equipment or machinery. So the current project that I'm working on, the Upcycling Station Handbook, was very much inspired by other presentations to this network. And Walter's, one of the first presentation was Upcycling in Africa, and I was really impressed at the work that Walter was doing in Botswana with low-skilled, very low-income women, and they were using exactly the same sort of factory waste that we had access to. And I wanted to see if we could help these women make pieces that had a value that could be sold on, and how we could upskill this group so that they could then make products that were sold and they could enter the money economy. And I was also very inspired by Kevin Kimwale's upcycling project. And what really attracted me to these was that not only were they helping people to learn about upcycling and using upcycling to actually create buildings, but it was improving people's lives. So the aim of the Upcycling Handbook is to see if the creative community could not just share ideas about upcycling and provide a model for what you can do with waste material, but very importantly, that we could produce technology that could be made from waste. So this isn't my drawing of a loom. This is from instructable.com, but I'm working on designing a loom that can be made out of pallets, because waste pallets are something that's available, all around the world, and that if we could design a loom that could be made from pallets, then people would be able to weave. So at the moment, I'm asking all of you and all of the other people in the network to think about how we could simplify some of the technology that we use to upcycle, and we're putting together a handbook that will include diagrams and instructions on how you can make the equipment necessary for upcycling. And that's it.